Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Not only has Donald Trump won far more comfortably than the polls predicted, but it also seems that he has won the popular vote as well. So today we ask, how surprising is his victory? What sort of president will he be for America? And what will be his impact on the rest of the world and in particular India? Those are the key issues I shall explore today with India's former ambassador to the United States, Meera Shankar. Mr. Shankar, Donald Trump has made history by becoming only the second US president after Grover Cleveland to win back the presidency after losing it. And he seems to have done it far more comfortably than the polls predicted. In fact, he's won the popular vote, which he didn't win in 2016. In contrast, Kamala Harris seems to have underperformed compared to Biden in both blue and red color states. So let me start by asking, are you surprised by the result?
Well, I'm not surprised because there were 4 to 5% undecided voters till the last minute. And many of these turned up. And depending on which way they moved, that could have had a decisive impact on the elections. And many of the undecided voters who came seem to have swung for Donald Trump. So a 4 to 5% difference could make all the difference between a close fight and a decisive victory.
Except the interesting thing is, it seems the undecided voters have largely, if not predominantly, swung to Trump rather than divide in terms of the proportion of the poll results.
Yes, they've swung to Trump, and that is what has led to this decisive victory, actually. And it seems that the issues which Donald Trump raised found resonance with the American public. If you've heard the conversations with voters, the top issues for them were the economy, particularly inflation and the cost of everyday goods. And the second has been illegal immigration. I think these two issues resounded with the American public. Even though Joe Biden had done a fairly skillful job of managing a post COVID economy, growth rates at 2.3% average over his term compared to Trump's 2.4%. Uh, Inflation at
In fact,
9%.
can I interrupt and put it to you that one of the bewildering aspects of the American outcome is that the economy for 66% of the country was considered the prime issue. It probably dominated even immigration. And yet the performance of the economy under Joe Biden was probably extremely good. American inflation is down to 2.1%, yet inflation was considered to be a key issue. The American GDP is perhaps the fastest growing of all the G7 countries, and yet people were unhappy with America's growth. And the job situation is perhaps better than it's been for several decades. Some people say since the 50s. And yet inflation and the economy was a cause of concern rather than one of voting for Biden.
Yes, because though there was steady growth, though unemployment came down to 3.3%, now it's up to a little over 4%, though real wages for the bottom rung increased and the number of new jobs created was 16 million as opposed to 6 million during Trump's 3 years, first 3 years, and then, of course, a sharp dip during the pandemic. So, despite all this, it didn't translate into a feel good factor for the public because of high levels of inflation, which were not there just for a couple of months, but for the first few years of the Biden presidency, touching a high of over 9% in 2022. Now, as a result, even though inflation has come down to 2% today, there's the cumulative impact of the inflation over these years on prices. So people, when they go to buy a gallon of milk, they say, oh, 5 years ago, I used to buy a gallon of milk at X price. And today I'm buying a gallon of milk at X plus, whatever. So it's the cumulative impact of that inflation which has been felt. The second aspect has been to curb inflation. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates. And this meant that the home loans that people had taken to buy homes, servicing them became more expensive as mortgage payments rose because of the higher interest rate. So you had these two aspects: high interest rates and higher mortgage payments, and increased prices of everyday goods, which seem to have weighed with the electorate in terms of voting.
The net result is not only has Trump won the presidency, but the Republicans have won the Senate. And by some calculations, I'm going now primarily by CNN, they seem to have also possibly retained the House. And if that happens, it's a clean sweep. So, how powerful a president is Donald Trump going to be? Two of his former colleagues, John Kelly, his former chief of staff, and Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, have gone on record to call him a fascist. Now that he's an incredibly powerful president with the Senate and possibly the House on his side, are we likely to see more of that side of him?
Well, checks and balances will clearly have eroded, because if there had been a different complexion to even one of the houses in the US Congress, it would have meant that there has to be negotiation, some middle ground has to be found. But if the Republicans sweep both the House and the Senate, as they are slated to do, then this, along with a Supreme Court which has been packed with conservative judges, means that the normal checks and balances which limit the power of the executive will not be in operation. It means
Absolutely.
Donald Trump will have a freer hand.
Absolutely. And now that the Senate is under Republican control, he will have no problem pushing through his nominees, whether they are for government appointments and ambassadorships, whether they are for his own cabinet, or whether it's Supreme Court judges that he's replacing. The Senate will not stand in the way, and he'll be able to change the entire complexion of the American system if he so wishes.
Yes, that is true. But his first message, after his victory became apparent, has been a little more conciliatory than his usual messages. Otherwise, he's been talking of retribution, there will be retribution, and the worst is the enemy within, and using the National Guards and even the army, armed forces, to deal with the enemy within. So all that dark and dire rhetoric was not visible in his first speech, where he said that this is the time for America to unite, this is a time for healing. But we have to wait and watch whether he actually follows this, or he goes back in his actual practice to what he has threatened to do.
Absolutely. The talk of retribution for those who he claims had cheated in 2020 may not happen. The claim that he will pardon all those who were accused of storming the Capitol in January 2021 may not happen. But what about the threats he's made about immigration? He said that he will be carrying out mass deportations of people who are considered illegal aliens. That number has been estimated to be possibly as much as 11 million. That would be huge if it happened.
Yes, it could be
How
even.
likely is it?
Well, I think that deportations of those apprehended at the border by the border security forces is more likely. And he will certainly deny those coming into the US the right to seek asylum. He will seek to deny that. He will say, if you want asylum, send in your applications from outside. Uh, Deporting those who are already in the US will be a painful exercise. It will mean really conducting raids, arresting people, and those persons will also have the right to go to court. That could be a lengthy process. It will mean huge administrative expenditure, but he could do some token raids here and there to show that he is following through on what he had promised, especially where there are very visible colonies of illegal immigrants on the streets.
Now, there's also what's called Project 25, a document of policies prepared by a right leaning think tank, which talks of things like replacing the top tier of Washington's bureaucracy with Trump loyalists, dismantling agencies of government like the Departments of Justice, Energy, Education, also possibly disbanding the FBI and the Federal Reserve. I know that his campaign distanced itself from Project 25. But now that he's back with a popular majority behind him, now that he has the Senate and possibly this House on his side, might he push through some of these policies as well? Might he, in fact, endorse Project 25, unlike his campaign, which was keen to distance itself?
Yes, it could, but this is, of course, a report by the Heritage Foundation, and Trump has tried to distance himself from it. Uh, Whether he will push some aspects of it through, he could try to reduce some of the regulatory agencies, such as the Environment Protection Agency or the Federal Trade Commission. I think the regulatory agencies is where he's likely to act first. Doing things like reducing the Department of Justice, doing away with the FBI, changing the way in which junior bureaucrats are recruited on the basis of merit rather than political loyalties. I think those things would be a little more difficult to do. As it is today, assistant secretaries and above are all political appointees, and those appointments await Senate confirmation. And therefore, between one administration and the next, you often have a period where there's nobody you can speak to, actually. Of course, in this case, if he controls the Senate, the confirmation process may be easier. But still, till they decide on the appointees, till the Senate confirmation process is complete, there are gaps of months in actually having people in place. So at least having a merit-based lower bureaucracy provides some continuity in the administrative process. If the whole thing becomes politicized, I really don't know if it will work in a stable fashion.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Let's come to the impact Trump could have on the world. He's talked of imposing a 20% tariff on all imports and a far higher tariff on Chinese exports to America. Presumably, that will provoke retaliation from several countries. Is there a danger that we could come perilously close to a trade war?
Yes, if it's implemented. Even last time, if you see, when Trump had placed tariffs on steel and aluminum exports to the US from a number of countries, there was immediate retaliatory action by the European countries affected. India tried to negotiate and took 2 years before putting in place reciprocal tariffs, but we did to an equivalent amount. And when he imposed his tariff hike on 200 billion worth of Chinese imports coming into the US, China imposed reciprocal tariffs on a similar amount of US exports to China. So, yes, it could well trigger a tit for tat reciprocal trade action. And of course, he has called India a tariff king. So clearly, we will be in his sights. And there could be trade friction, as there was during his first term. But if he carries through on his threat to impose much higher tariffs on all Chinese imports, we don't know if he'll carry through on it, then that could also provide an opportunity for India and other countries, because it'll provide a fillip to the whole policy of de-risking from over-dependence on China and looking for a China plus one strategy. Whether India will benefit and to what extent will depend on how foreign investors see the business climate in India, because there are other countries which are in play, including Vietnam, including Malaysia, including Mexico, including Poland. But clearly, India could also stand to benefit. So there could be some cons. There could also be some profit which we could derive if we position ourselves adequately.
Let's at this point talk a little bit in detail about the relationship Biden had with India and how it will change now that Trump is the president. Trump has repeatedly said that Mr. Modi is a good friend of his. He said it very recently again. He's clearly very close to Mr. Modi. He'll remember Ab Ki Baar Trump Sarkar. What sort of relationship do you anticipate Trump 2.0 will seek with India? And what will be the difference between that relationship and the one that President Biden had over the last 4 years?
Look, I think the strategic convergence between the US and India in the Indo-Pacific in terms of how to meet the challenge posed by an increasingly assertive and even aggressive China, I think will ensure that the strategic partnership between the two countries continues to grow. For the US, this is one issue on which there is consensus between Republicans and Democrats, and that is that China is the most significant potential challenger to the US, and that the US needs to deal with China in a different way to handle the strategic, economic, and technological competition. And in this, Biden tried to build coalitions in Asia, including elevating the Quad to summit level, putting in place AUKUS, Australia, UK, US, the Japan, South Korea, US trilateral, negotiating new defense agreement with the Philippines, and in West Asia.
Can I interrupt? Will the Quad have the high importance that it had under Biden, under Trump? I know that Quad started with Trump, but will he give it the same level of importance that Biden did? And secondly, do you believe Trump will be willing to come to India for the Quad summit, which is scheduled to be here next year, which means that he'll be paying a visit to India in the very first 6-7 months of his second presidency?
Well, we have to wait and see. But since he revived the Quad and had meetings at foreign ministers level, I think he would be committed to it, because he would see it as his initiative to revive the Quad. Biden elevated it to summit level. And Trump perhaps is likely to go along with that. But again, we have to wait and see how much importance he gives to building institutional coalitions uh, to balance China in Asia, which was Biden's approach,
But Trump can
vis-a-vis
also be,
going it alone.
but Trump can also be transactional in a way in which Biden never was. Do you think that that will play a factor in the relationship, that he will want something visibly in return from India for whatever he does for India? Last time round, Harley Davidson's became a great issue of concern for him, even though they're of minimal importance to India. Will there be similar such irritants which his transactional attitude will keep throwing into the play?
Yes, there will be, because he loves the art of the deal. And, this belief that he's a tough negotiator. So that will be there within the overall geopolitical salience. You've seen it even with Europe, where he has not shied away from taking trade action against his closest allies, including Canada and Mexico, renegotiating certain aspects of NAFTA, walking out of the Trans Pacific Partnership last time when he was president. So he is capable of taking a transactional view on some aspects of the relationship, even as he tries to build the strategic relationship. He doesn't see it as one unified whole. He sees the relationship as different aspects. And on the economic side, he is willing to take trade action, even vis-a-vis his closest allies.
Now, one of the tensions in India US relations is the accusation of the involvement of Indian officials in the attempt to kill Gurpatwan Singh Pannun. And secondly, another tension is India's treatment of Muslims and Modi's democratic backsliding. Are these tensions likely to continue under a Trump presidency, or will he take a different view on these issues compared to the Biden administration?
Look, as far as human rights and democracy are concerned, Trump has made it clear during his first presidency that these are not issues which are going to inform his presidency, that he doesn't attach importance to these issues. So there we know very clearly that this is not going to be a priority for him. With regard to the Pannun case, since it is in court and it's being handled by the Department of Justice, I would imagine that there would be some degree of continuity to signal that the US will not tolerate violence against any of its citizens on its own soil. Having said that, I think this whole issue of Khalistan may get less support from President Trump because overall, as I said, he does not place emphasis on human rights, democratic freedoms. These are not core elements of his foreign policy approach. The other aspect is that with regard to Ukraine, we could expect that he would seek to commence negotiations to end the conflict. He's been very clear that that's what he wants to do. So if such negotiations commence, if they succeed in bringing about an end to the conflict, I think it will make it easier for India to navigate its relationships with the US and with Russia independently without one jarring or grating on the other.
You're absolutely right when you say that he will seek to commence negotiations to end the conflict. The question is, on what terms will he seek to end that conflict? Most people believe that given the position he's repeatedly taken on the Russia-Ukraine crisis, Putin will be cheering the news that he's the new president and Zelensky will be in tears. And in the end, Trump will probably bring the Ukraine resistance to the Russian invasion to a full stop, regardless of what the Ukrainians themselves feel. It may work out to India's advantage, but what will be the international ramifications of doing it in a way that reduces the Ukraine resistance by force? And how will that go down in Europe?
I don't know whether he will seek to get a good bargain in negotiations. Vis-a-vis the Taliban, if you recall, he held negotiations without involving or informing the Afghan government. And he eventually even invited Taliban leaders to Camp David and set a date for US pullout. And so we don't know if there'll be a repeat. But there is a difference because vis-a-vis Afghanistan, there was political exhaustion in the United States, and both Democrats and Republicans wanted out. Nobody wanted to continue funding American military presence there. Vis-a-vis Ukraine, there's a substantial portion of opinion in the United States, including amongst the Republicans, which believes in supporting Ukraine. Of course, now Trump controls both the Senate and the House, so it's easier for him to get his way. If there had been a Democratic controlled House, it would have been more difficult. But he also knows that even in Europe, his whole stance may cause some, concern. And European countries are trying to Trump-proof their policy.
Let me ask you, what do you believe will be the impact Trump has on the Israel-Gaza war and the situation in the Middle East? As the author of the Abraham Accords, will he temper his pro-Israeli, pro-Netanyahu position with a greater understanding of Arab sentiment? Or do you believe Netanyahu will now have carte blanche to do what he wants to Hamas, to Hezbollah, and possibly even to Iran?
Well, when Biden was cautioning Netanyahu not to attack the nuclear facilities in Iran or the oil installations, Trump publicly said, but that is exactly what he should attack, the nuclear facilities, because that's where the threat comes from. The second statement he's made is Netanyahu should finish it. Now, what finish it means, we don't really know. But at the same time, he is susceptible to oil wealth. And it depends how the Saudis and other countries play their cards. Because as you said, he is the one who had brokered the Abraham Accords, where UAE, Morocco, and Sudan and other countries had Bahrain had recognized Israel. And it was expected that Saudi Arabia might follow suit. So if the Saudis hold out and seek a ceasefire, an end to the current conflict as a condition for resuming the process which had been set in motion, I think it's something which might work. The other is that Netanyahu was also probably holding out for a ceasefire to favor Trump. So once the election is over, whether he may be more amenable to US persuasion if Trump is the president.
One last issue. It's widely expected that Trump will once again withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. And it's also widely anticipated, at least in Europe, that he will seriously weaken NATO, possibly by undermining the Article 5 guarantee. If either or both of those happen, how would they be viewed from an Indian perspective?
Look, I think the climate change accord would have global ramifications because it would put paid to the efforts to deal with the whole crisis of global warming and to keep global temperature increases within manageable levels. We've already given up the earlier thresholds that we were hoping to achieve. And if the US, which is the biggest polluter, walks out of the Paris Accord, then I think it will weaken the impulse in other countries to pay the price of shifting, especially developing countries, because they don't have the resources also to shift to renewable energy or to make the transitions required to deal with it. Europe has already been backsliding because of the increase in energy costs. You saw Rishi Sunak go back on many of the targets which they had set themselves. Germany has also gone back on some of its targets. So I do think that it will be a serious setback to efforts to deal with global warming. And for countries like India, this can be devastating because a 3-degree increase in temperature or 4-degree increase in temperature would mean that our entire agriculture will be impacted, and we would have to shift towards adapting to the new circumstances, which would mean a whole period of turbulence in this transition. So I think it would be a serious setback. With regard to NATO, Trump has talked a bigger game than he has actually put into play. I think he will pressurize the NATO countries to take on a greater burden of their defense. There'll be more pressure on European countries to meet the targets set in terms of percentage of GDP on defense expenditure. But I don't think he will seek to change the guarantees under NATO. He may stop the process of NATO expansion. He may seek to stop the process of NATO expansion, which Russia has been seeing as particularly threatening and which triggered, in a sense, the invasion of Ukraine.
Mr. Shankar, thank you very much for the time you've given me, and in particular for your insights into what a second Trump presidency could mean for America, for India, as well as the rest of the world. I'm deeply grateful. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.